How to trust God after betrayal and pain, and find peace again. Have you ever wondered why God stays silent when your heart is breaking? Why the heavens feel closed while you're praying through tears that no one else sees? Today, you'll discover the hidden purpose behind divine silence, the secret reason why God allows pain, betrayal, and waiting to shape the miracle that's already forming in your life. Because maybe what you're living right now isn't punishment. It's preparation for something sacred that only God can see. I know what it means to walk through that silence. I've faced the moments when faith trembled, when I asked if God had forgotten me. But it was in that silence that I learned something extraordinary. The quiet doesn't mean absence, it means transformation. Every unanswered prayer was rewriting my story from within, teaching me how to trust the God who speaks even when he doesn't use words. And if you stay with me until the end, you'll see what I saw. That the silence of God hides one of his greatest revelations. What you're about to hear may completely change the way you understand pain, faith, and the mystery of divine timing. Because the moment you think God is silent might be the very moment he's speaking the loudest. When the world breaks your trust and heaven seems silent. Have you ever trusted someone so deeply that their betrayal left you breathless? It's like watching the ground beneath your feet crack open, realizing the person you leaned on was never strong enough to hold the weight of your heart. You gave your best, you spoke with honesty, you believed with sincerity. And yet, what you received in return was silence, distance, and disappointment. The pain of betrayal doesn't just live in memory. It echoes in your chest in that hollow space where laughter used to live. And when you fall to your knees and whisper, "God, why did you let this happen?" heaven seems to say nothing at all. That silence pierces deeper than any wound. But what if the silence of God isn't absence? What if it's the sacred atmosphere where your heart begins to heal in ways noise could never allow? When betrayal hits, the first instinct is to question your worth. You wonder if you weren't enough, if somehow your love, your patience, or your goodness failed. But God's truth is different. The betrayal didn't happen because you were unworthy. It happened because he was revealing something unseen. Sometimes God allows the world to break your trust so that you will finally see who was holding it all along. Pain unmasks illusions. It tears down the fragile altars you built around people who were never meant to play the role of God in your life. He knows that misplaced trust leads to heartbreak, so he permits the shaking, not to punish you, but to realign your heart with eternal things. And yes, it hurts when people walk away, when the ones you defended now stand silent while others misunderstand you. You replay the conversations, the promises, the moments of laughter that now feel like lies. You cry out to heaven, asking for justice, for explanation, for peace. But all you hear is quiet. That quiet, though, is not the end of the story. In that quiet, heaven is working. God is writing chapters you cannot yet read, moving pieces that your eyes cannot yet see. His silence is not proof of indifference, it's evidence of preparation. He's teaching you to find peace not in explanations, but in his presence. There's something sacred about the nights when you weep alone and still whisper his name. That is faith in its purest form, not faith that expects constant answers, but faith that holds on through the absence of them. When the world breaks your trust, you begin to learn that human promises can be fragile, but divine promises never fail. The silence of God is not a void. It's a voice that speaks differently. It speaks through stillness, through the strength that rises in you each morning, through the small mercies that meet you in the dark. It says, "I am still here, even when you can't feel me." You may not see it now, but one day you'll look back and understand that the silence was mercy. If God had spoken then, you might have settled for less than what he was preparing. If he had answered too soon, you might have gone back to what was breaking you. His quiet was your protection. While you were asking for closure, he was designing resurrection. That's how divine love works. It allows the breaking to make room for the blessing. And when you finally see what he was building through that silence, you'll thank him for every unanswered prayer, for every door that stayed closed, for every person who walked away when you begged them to stay. But until that day comes, hold on to this truth. The silence of God is not punishment, it's training. It's where He teaches you to stand, to listen, to trust. When everything collapses, He whispers strength into your spirit. When betrayal leaves you questioning your value, He reminds you that your worth was written in His blood, not in anyone's approval. Every time your heart breaks, heaven rebuilds it stronger, purer, wiser. So do not despise the silence, lean into it. It's there that you'll hear the softest voice, the one that doesn't shout over your pain, but heals it from within. The world may have broken your trust, but God is rebuilding your soul. The silence that once felt unbearable will one day be remembered as the most intimate sound you've ever heard. The moment when you stopped depending on voices that could lie and started trusting the one who never does. Because when the world breaks your trust and heaven seems silent, that's not the end. It's the sacred beginning of your restoration. You are not alone in that quiet space. You are standing in the presence of the one who is preparing your peace. You may not feel it yet, but you are being carried. And one day, the same silence that brought you to tears will bring you revelation. God will speak, not to explain what happened, but to show you what He built through it. The silence is not the absence of His love. It's the sound of His hands at work, shaping a new heart inside you. The hidden hand of God in the middle of your pain. There are moments when life seems to fall apart without warning, when every plan collapses, every dream fades, and the people you thought would hold your hand disappear one by one. You look around, and it feels as if you're standing in the wreckage of everything you built. You pray, but the answers don't come. You search for purpose in the pain, but nothing makes sense. It's in those moments that you begin to ask, where is God in all of this? And though you can't see Him, though the silence stretches longer than your strength, His hands are moving. Hidden, steady, intentional. The hidden hand of God is the mystery that unfolds only through time. It doesn't reveal itself when the wound is fresh. It whispers its truth through the healing. When you think you've lost everything, God is often rearranging what you have so that what's left can finally grow. You see confusion, but He sees construction. You see betrayal, but He sees protection. What feels like destruction is sometimes divine redirection. Because God is not only the God who answers prayers, He's also the one who interrupts them when they lead you away from His purpose. You might think you've been forgotten, but heaven never stops watching. God's hand works best when yours are too tired to fight. When you reach the end of your own strength, that's when His grace begins to take form. Every delay, every disappointment, every moment you thought was wasted is part of a divine pattern far bigger than what your heart can imagine right now. He is not punishing you, He's positioning you. Sometimes He hides His hand not to confuse you, but to teach you to trust Him beyond sight. It's hard to believe that something sacred could be hidden inside your suffering. But think about it. Every miracle in Scripture was born in a moment of pain. Joseph was betrayed before he was promoted. Ruth was widowed before she was redeemed. David was hunted before he was crowned. Jesus was crucified before He was glorified. The pattern hasn't changed. Before God shows His purpose, He allows your heart to be emptied of everything that could compete with His glory. That emptiness you feel isn't evidence of loss. It's the space He clears to fill with peace that can't be taken away. There's something extraordinary about God's ability to take what was meant for harm and turn it into holiness. That betrayal you faced didn't surprise Him. That loss you cried over didn't catch Him off guard. He saw it all coming, and even then He said, I can use this. The hand you can't see is the same one that parts seas, rebuilds walls, and restores what was broken beyond repair. When your story feels out of control, His hand is still writing the next line with perfect precision. You don't need to understand how He'll do it. You just need to stay still long enough to let Him. Sometimes God hides His work because if you saw it too soon, you'd interfere with it. You'd cling to what He's trying to remove or rush toward what He's not yet finished preparing. His hiddenness is mercy. His silence is protection. While you cry out for clarity, He's crafting closure. While you're asking why, He's preparing the how. What you interpret as absence is actually divine restraint. God holding back until the perfect moment to reveal what He's been building behind the curtain of your pain. You'll recognize His hand not by the noise of miracles, but by the quiet transformation that begins inside you. The day you stop needing to know why and start saying thank you is the day you realize He was there all along. That peace that comes out of nowhere, that strength that rises in your weakness, that new beginning you didn't plan. Those are fingerprints of the hidden hand of God. He never stopped working. He simply worked where your eyes couldn't reach. So if you're standing in the middle of your pain today, and everything in you wants to give up, pause. Breathe. The hidden hand of God is holding what you can't fix. You don't have to see it to believe it. Trust that what you call confusion, heaven calls construction. What you call loss, heaven calls preparation. And when the right time comes, the hidden hand that guided you through the fire will lift you into peace. You'll look back and realize that every delay had purpose, every silence had meaning, and every wound carried you closer to the miracle God was forming in the dark. When God allows the collapse of what you thought was safe, there comes a moment when what you trusted most begins to fall apart. The friendship that once felt unbreakable becomes distant. The job you thought was secure slips away. The relationship that defined your identity ends without warning. You try to hold everything together, but the more you cling, the faster it crumbles. It feels like the foundation beneath your life is giving way, and the question that echoes in your mind is simple. Why would God let this happen? You prayed, you believed, you stayed faithful, and yet, here you are, standing among the ruins of what you thought was safe. But sometimes God allows what you built to fall, not because He's cruel, but because He knows it was never strong enough to carry your destiny. We humans love stability. We crave the comfort of predictability, of routines that make us feel in control. But God knows that faith rarely grows in comfort. Faith is born in the places where safety ends. What you thought was security may have been the very thing keeping you from dependence on Him. You built walls that looked like protection, but they were actually prisons. Places where fear disguised itself as wisdom and comfort pretended to be peace. God allows those walls to collapse so that the real foundation, His presence, can finally take its place. It hurts, yes, but the pain of collapse is often the sound of false peace breaking apart. When the things you counted on start to fall, it feels like betrayal from life itself. You replay every step wondering if you could have done something differently. But divine love doesn't always prevent collapse, it uses it. God never promised to protect what you built outside of His plan. He promised to rebuild your life upon His truth. The collapse is not punishment, it's transformation. He shakes what can be shaken so that what is eternal may remain. The storm isn't destroying you. It's exposing the weak structures that could never hold what He's about to place in your hands. Think of Abraham leaving his homeland, Joseph being thrown into a pit, Job losing everything, or Peter watching his confidence crumble. In every story, God dismantled the illusion of safety to reveal something greater, Himself. Abraham found purpose in the unknown, Joseph found favor in captivity, Job found faith in loss, and Peter found grace in failure. Their stories remind you that what collapses in your life is never random. God removes false foundations because He refuses to let you build your future on fragile ground. The truth is, you cannot discover who God truly is until what you've built without Him no longer stands. When you lose the job, the relationship, the status, the certainty, it feels like you've lost everything, but in reality, you've lost what was temporary to find what is eternal. The collapse exposes your dependence, not your failure. It's a divine test, not of your strength, but of your surrender. Will you still trust Him when everything that looked solid disappears? Because faith that only exists in calm seasons is not faith, it's comfort. God allows the shaking to reveal the kind of trust that survives storms. And here's the mystery. After the collapse, there is clarity. When the dust settles, you begin to see that what fell apart wasn't holding you together. It was holding you back. You start to understand that God didn't remove safety. He redefined it. True safety is not the absence of change. It's the presence of God in the middle of it. You don't need to fear what breaks, because what breaks in His hands will always be rebuilt stronger. The walls that fell will become the ground where faith grows. There's peace in realizing that collapse is not the end of the story. It's the turning point. God takes the rubble of what failed and turns it into the raw material of your new beginning. The heartbreak, the confusion, the unanswered prayers, all of them are ingredients in the recipe of renewal. When everything you built without Him falls apart, that's when everything built by Him can finally begin. So if you're standing in the aftermath right now, surrounded by the ruins of what used to feel safe, don't rush to rebuild. Let God lay the first stone this time. Let His hand design the structure that won't crumble again. Because what He builds stands forever. The collapse wasn't meant to destroy you. It was meant to deliver you from everything that could. One day, you'll thank Him for letting it fall. You'll see that He didn't take your safety away. He was leading you toward the only place you'll ever truly be safe. In His will, in His hands, in His peace. The sacred purpose of betrayal. Betrayal is one of the deepest wounds a soul can experience. It is the moment when trust, the most sacred gift between hearts, is shattered into silence. You feel the sting not only of loss but of deception. The piercing realization that the person who once said, "I'm with you," is now the reason you're bleeding. It's the kind of pain that leaves you questioning everything. Your choices, your intuition, even your faith. You ask, "God, why did you let them come so close if they were going to hurt me?" Yet somewhere beyond the pain, hidden in the layers of heartbreak, lies a secret. Betrayal, when surrendered to God, becomes a sacred turning point in the story of your destiny. It's hard to believe that something so cruel could carry divine purpose. But the truth is that God never wastes pain. The betrayal that crushed you is the same one He will use to transform you. Look at the stories woven through Scripture. Joseph betrayed by his brothers. David hunted by the very man he served. Jesus betrayed with a kiss. Each one faced rejection, humiliation, and injustice, yet none of their stories ended in ruin. Instead, each betrayal became the bridge to their calling. Without the betrayal, Joseph would have never reached the palace, David would have never worn the crown, and the cross would have never become the symbol of redemption. What broke them was also what built them. What hurt them was what positioned them for purpose. Betrayal strips away illusions. It reveals who truly stands with you and who only stands near you for what they can gain. It uncovers the motives that words conceal. It hurts because it exposes truth, and truth always costs something. But the sacredness of betrayal lies in what it reveals about you as well. It tests your heart, your humility, your faith. It asks whether you'll harden or heal, whether you'll let bitterness define your story or let grace refine it. And while the world tells you to seek revenge, heaven whispers something different. This pain is not punishment, it's preparation. When God allows betrayal, He is not being cruel, He is being surgical. He removes what cannot go with you into the next season. The person who wounded you was part of your story, but not of your future. Their exit, though painful, was necessary for your elevation. You may not see it yet, but there are places God is taking you that require freedom from attachments that would anchor you to the past. Sometimes He allows people to hurt you so you will finally release what you refuse to let go of. It is His mercy disguised as heartbreak. The sacred purpose of betrayal is not just to expose others. It is to awaken you. Through it, you learn the difference between human loyalty and divine faithfulness. You discover that even when everyone else walks away, God stays. The betrayal that tried to silence you becomes the moment you hear His voice more clearly than ever before. In that loneliness, you begin to feel His presence. In that silence, you learn to trust His timing. And in that pain, you learn to love without depending on being loved back. That is how heaven turns betrayal into transformation. It purifies your love until it reflects His. One of the greatest revelations you'll ever have is that God's plan does not stop at the point of betrayal. The cross itself is proof. Judas's kiss was not the end. It was the beginning of salvation. What looked like defeat was the doorway to victory. The same is true for you. The betrayal that tried to destroy you is actually the threshold to something greater. What they meant for evil, God is turning for good. And when that transformation is complete, you'll realize that the pain you thought was killing you was actually the hand of God freeing you. So instead of asking, "Why did they betray me?" begin asking, "God, what are you trying to reveal through this?" Because in every betrayal there is a lesson about trust, a revelation about purpose, and a deeper encounter with grace. One day you'll look back at the faces that broke your heart and feel nothing but peace. You'll thank God not for what they did, but for what He did through it. You'll see that betrayal didn't end your story, it sanctified it. It removed what was false, so that what was eternal could finally stand. The sacred purpose of betrayal is to lead you to the only one who cannot betray you. It is to teach your heart that true love, true loyalty, and true peace are found only in God. Let that truth sink deep. People may fail you, but God never will. Their betrayal was temporary. His faithfulness is forever. And when you let Him rewrite that pain, you'll discover that the same moment that wounded you was the very moment He began to heal you. When God removes what you loved to protect what you'll become, there comes a season when God takes something or someone you never imagined living without. It feels like your heart is being torn in two. The friendship ends. The opportunity disappears. The door you prayed would stay open suddenly closes without explanation. You question everything. You replay the moments that led up to the loss, searching for signs you might have missed. You whisper, "God, why did you take this from me? I loved it, I needed it, I was happy there." And heaven answers, not with words but with a strange kind of peace that hurts before it heals. Because what you call loss, God calls protection. What you call ending, He calls rescue. God sees what you can't. He knows the path ahead, the battles you don't yet see, and the weight your heart cannot carry. Sometimes the things or people you love are not meant to walk with you into your destiny. They fit your past but not your purpose. They served a season but not your future. So when He removes them, it's not because He's cruel, it's because He's guarding the calling you've prayed to step into. His love doesn't always give you what you want. It gives you what will keep you whole. You think He's breaking your heart, but He's actually saving it. You may not realize it yet, but the moment God removed what you loved was the moment He began freeing you. We hold on to things that once gave us comfort, not noticing when they've started to hold us back. We cling to people who once felt like blessings, even when they start to drain our spirit. God sees the danger of what you can't release. He knows when something that used to be good has become a trap, so He intervenes. He allows circumstances to shift, hearts to change, paths to part. And though it feels like rejection, it's actually redirection. Remember the story of Abraham and Isaac. God never wanted the sacrifice, He wanted surrender. He wanted to know that Abraham trusted Him more than the promise itself. In the same way, God tests your heart, not to measure your pain, but to strengthen your faith. When He takes what you love, He's not trying to harm you. He's proving that His presence is enough. That's where trust deepens, where peace begins to grow even in the soil of loss. What God asks you to release is never greater than what He plans to restore. You might think the story of your loss is about endings, but in heaven's language, it's about evolution. Every closed door is a divine conversation. You've outgrown this. I'm calling you higher. That's why some relationships end quietly. Some opportunities dissolve suddenly. Some seasons simply expire. God doesn't wait for your permission to protect your destiny. When He sees something ahead that could break you, He removes what's in the way, even if it breaks your heart now, because His love is not sentimental. It's surgical. It cuts only to heal. So when you lose what you love, resist the temptation to chase it. Don't reopen doors He has closed. The same God who removed it knows exactly what to replace it with. Sometimes what you're crying over is the very thing that was holding you back. That friendship you thought was loyal might have kept you from finding peace. That opportunity you begged to keep might have cost you your purpose. God's removal is never random. It's always redemption in motion. It takes faith to let go of something you love without resentment. It takes even greater faith to thank God for taking it. But that's the place where transformation begins. The tears that fall in surrender water the soil of your future. Every why whispered through pain becomes a seed of trust that will one day bloom into wisdom. One day, you'll look back and say, if God hadn't taken that from me, I would have never become who I am today. God's love is not the kind that always says yes. It's the kind that knows when to say no for your protection. He removes what your heart clings to so He can replace it with what your soul truly needs. And though right now the loss feels unbearable, what's waiting ahead is peace you couldn't have found any other way. When God removes what you love, it's not because He's angry. It's because He's preparing you to love without fear, to trust without proof, and to walk without dependence on what can be taken away. So let this truth settle deep within you. What left your life did not take your destiny. What was removed from your hands is still under His control. You didn't lose, you were liberated. You didn't fail, you were protected. One day, when you're standing in the place God prepared for you, you'll realize that every removal was actually an act of mercy. The pain you feel now is the sound of heaven rearranging your life to fit His purpose. And when that purpose unfolds, you'll finally understand. God never took what you loved to hurt you. He took it to protect what you were becoming. The silence between wounds and miracles. There is a season between pain and promise that feels like a wilderness. You're not where you were, but you're not yet where you hoped to be. The betrayal is behind you, but the healing still feels far away. You pray, you wait, you try to hold on to faith, but the silence stretches endlessly, and your heart whispers, God, are you still there? This silence isn't easy. It tests your patience, challenges your hope, and shakes your trust. But this quiet space, this stillness between wounds and miracles, is sacred. It is the workshop of heaven, where God rebuilds your heart without your permission, where He prepares your miracle without your awareness. We think of silence as absence, but in God's language, silence is activity. While you see stillness, He sees progress. While you wait in confusion, He works in precision. The silence between wounds and miracles is where God's hand moves in the shadows, aligning people, moments, and outcomes that you can't yet comprehend. The same God who parted the Red Sea also spent 400 years in silence before sending His Son. The same Jesus who healed lepers also stayed silent before Pilate. Heaven's silence never means nothing is happening. It means everything is being prepared. It's in this silence that your faith learns to breathe without evidence. You stop chasing answers and start seeking presence. The tears that once fell in frustration begin to fall in surrender. You learn that faith isn't proven when God speaks, but when He doesn't. It's easy to believe when prayers are answered, but real faith grows in the waiting, in the in-between where every emotion tells you to give up. Yet something inside whispers, hold on. That whisper is God's way of saying, I'm still here. Trust me even when you can't hear me. Every miracle in Scripture began in a moment of silence. Before the Red Sea opened, there was the sound of fear. Before Lazarus rose, there were days of waiting. Before resurrection, there was a tomb. Silence is not a pause in your story. It's the hidden chapter where God is proving His power. When He seems quiet, He is not ignoring you. He is preparing the timing that will make the miracle undeniable. Because if He gave it to you too soon, you might mistake the blessing for coincidence. But when He gives it after the silence, you'll know it was Him. The silence between wounds and miracles also heals your hearing. When life hurts, your heart fills with noise, fear, anger, confusion. But when God goes quiet, He's clearing that noise so His voice can be heard again. You begin to notice Him in the smallest details. The sunrise that arrives after a sleepless night. The strength that appears when you're sure you've reached your limit. The peace that suddenly settles in your spirit for no reason at all. These are the quiet signals that heaven is near. You start realizing that His silence was never emptiness. It was intimacy. Waiting is never wasted when God is involved. He uses this silence to stretch your faith and deepen your roots. He wants your trust to grow beyond emotion. When He delays the answer, He's teaching your heart to rely not on what you feel, but on what you know, that He is faithful even when He's invisible. You learn to worship through uncertainty, to praise in confusion, to believe without proof. And that kind of faith, the faith that survives silence, is the faith that moves mountains. The silence also refines your desires. In the noise of pain, you ask for what will soothe you. In the quiet of faith, you begin to ask for what will change you. God lets you sit in the silence until your prayers shift from "fix this" to "form me." And that's when transformation begins. That's when miracles take shape. Not in the noise of desperation, but in the calm of surrender. One day, when the silence breaks, you'll understand why it lasted as long as it did. You'll see that it wasn't delay, it was design. God waited until the exact moment when your heart was ready to hold what He was about to give. You'll realize that every unanswered prayer was an invitation to trust deeper, every tear was a seed, and every quiet night was a chapter of preparation. So if you're living in that silence now between the wound and the miracle, don't despair. This isn't the absence of God. It's the sound of Him working in ways too deep for words. Stay still. Stay faithful. Stay open. The same God who allowed the wound is preparing the wonder. The same silence that feels unbearable today will soon echo with the sound of breakthrough. And when it happens, you'll see that the quiet wasn't wasted time. It was sacred time, the divine interval where God turned pain into purpose and silence into song. The invisible battle between trust and fear. Every heart that has been wounded walks through an invisible battlefield. It's the space between what you know about God and what you feel about life. You tell yourself you trust Him, but inside fear whispers louder than faith. You pray, but you still worry. You believe, but you still tremble. This is the conflict few people talk about. The war that takes place not around you, but within you. It's not a war of flesh and blood. It's a war of thoughts, memories, and emotions fighting for control of your faith. You want to trust again, but the last time you did, it hurt too much. You want to believe, but betrayal left a scar that still burns when touched. And so you live between two voices. One calling you to let go, the other begging you to protect yourself. Fear builds walls where God wants to build bridges. It tells you that distance will keep you safe, that if you don't expect much, you won't be disappointed. But the truth is, fear doesn't protect. It imprisons. It keeps you locked inside the memories of what went wrong, unable to see what God is trying to make right. The longer you let fear lead, the more you'll mistake caution for wisdom and isolation for peace. But peace built on fear is fragile. It shatters the moment life tests it. That's why God keeps calling you back into trust. Not because He wants you to be naive, but because He wants you to be free. Trust is not blindness, it's bravery. It's choosing to step forward even when your heart shakes. It's believing that what broke you before will not break you again, because this time, God is the one holding your hand. Trust is not built in comfort, it's forged in fire. It's the quiet decision to keep your faith alive even when everything in you screams to give up. When you choose trust in the middle of fear, heaven notices. That's where growth happens. That's where miracles begin. The invisible battle between trust and fear is not about eliminating fear. It's about learning which voice you'll follow. Fear will remind you of your past. Trust will remind you of God's promises. Fear says, "You're alone." Trust says, "I am with you always." Fear says, "You can't handle this." Trust says, "My grace is sufficient for you." The voice you feed becomes the voice that leads. That's why prayer matters. It's not just words to heaven, it's realignment for your soul. Every time you pray, you starve fear and strengthen trust. Sometimes the battle is subtle. It's not in big decisions, but in the small, daily moments. The text you don't send, the apology you don't make, the opportunity you ignore because you're afraid of failing again. Fear makes you cautious even with blessings, suspicious even of peace. It convinces you that you're safer in survival mode than in surrender. But God didn't create you to survive. He created you to soar. And the only way to rise is to let go of what fear keeps gripping. There's a moment in every believer's life when God confronts fear directly. It's not always dramatic. It might come in a whisper, a question, a pause. Do you trust me? He doesn't ask because he doesn't know the answer. He asks because he wants you to hear it from your own heart. The moment you say yes, even with trembling lips, something shifts. Heaven moves on behalf of those who trust in spite of fear. It's not the absence of trembling that proves faith. It's the decision to move forward anyway. When fear rises again, and it will, remember what it fears most: your faith. Because faith dismantles fear's lies. Faith reminds you that the same God who brought you through yesterday's pain is the one walking beside you today. Every victory you've ever had began with a moment of trust that felt impossible. Every healing started with a step of faith that fear said not to take. And every blessing you'll ever receive will stand on the ashes of the fear you overcame. You will still feel afraid sometimes, and that's okay. Fear is part of being human, but it doesn't have to control you. The battle isn't won when you stop feeling fear. It's won when fear no longer decides your future. When you learn to look at your fears and say, even if it happens, I know God will still be with me. You take back the power that pain tried to steal. So if you're standing in that invisible battle today, know this: fear will always try to remind you of what hurt you, but God is trying to remind you of what healed you. Every time you choose trust, you are building something eternal inside your spirit. You are proving that pain may shape you, but it will not define you. The war between trust and fear is real, but victory is certain. For the one who keeps walking, even with shaking hands, toward the God who never fails. And when the battle quiets, you'll look back and see that the fear which once ruled your heart became the very place where your faith learned to reign. Learning to recognize God's voice. After human deception. There is a silence that comes after betrayal, a hollow quiet that makes you question everything you once believed. When someone you trusted deceives you, it doesn't just make you doubt them, it makes you doubt yourself. You start wondering, how could I not have seen it? How could I have been so blind? That kind of pain doesn't fade easily, because deception doesn't just break your heart. It confuses your discernment. It makes you second-guess every feeling, every voice, even the one that once sounded like God's. You pray, but your faith feels foggy. You listen, but you don't know if it's Him or just your own fear speaking. And yet it's precisely here, in the aftermath of deception, that God begins the quiet work of teaching you to hear Him again. Learning to recognize God's voice after being deceived is not about rushing back into confidence. It's about rediscovering the sacred rhythm of trust. Deception distorts perception. It leaves echoes that sound like truth, but lead to pain. That's why God often brings you into stillness before He speaks again. He doesn't compete with the noise of confusion. He silences it. He lets you sit in that uncomfortable quiet until your spirit remembers what His peace feels like. His voice doesn't shout, it settles, it doesn't rush, it reassures. You'll know it's Him not because it excites your emotions, but because it anchors your soul. God's voice is never manipulative. It doesn't pressure, flatter, or force. When the enemy speaks, his tone is urgent, demanding you to act, to decide, to prove. But when God speaks, He invites, not insists. His voice carries calm even when the message is convicting. That's how you begin to tell the difference. Deception leaves you restless. God's truth leaves you at peace. You'll know it's His voice when it brings clarity, not confusion. Humility, not pride. Direction, not destruction. Sometimes you'll notice that God's voice becomes clearest after everything else has fallen silent. When people stop validating you, when opportunities vanish, when every human voice that used to guide you disappears, that's when you start hearing the whisper again. It's softer than you remembered, but stronger than you imagined. It's the same voice that called Moses from a burning bush, that whispered to Elijah in the wind, that spoke to Mary in her fear. It's the voice that never left. It's the one you stopped recognizing when life got too loud. To hear God again You must be willing to unlearn what hurt you. Every deception plants seeds of fear, cynicism, and mistrust in the soil of your heart. God will begin uprooting those weeds one by one, not to shame you, but to free you. He'll show you that discernment isn't suspicion, it's peace. It's not about doubting everyone, it's about being grounded enough to trust His guidance above all. True discernment doesn't make you hard, it makes you whole. It allows you to see clearly without becoming cold, to love wisely without becoming distant. As He rebuilds your discernment, you'll start realizing that the same pain that confused you is now sharpening your hearing. The wound becomes a doorway. The place that hurt you most becomes the place you hear Him best, because pain cleanses perspective. It humbles you, softens you, quiets the noise of pride that once made you rush ahead of His voice. You start to wait longer before deciding, listen deeper before acting, and feel peace as confirmation instead of excitement as proof. This is maturity. This is restoration. God will also remind you that His voice will never contradict His word. Deception thrives where emotion leads and Scripture is ignored. But when you root your hearing in truth, the lies lose power. When you open your Bible again after betrayal, the words come alive differently. They comfort, correct, and cleanse. You realize that God was speaking all along. You just needed stillness to hear Him again. The more you return to His word, the more familiar His voice becomes. You'll know you've healed when His voice no longer sounds distant but familiar again. When you can hear correction and feel loved. When you can sense redirection and feel peace. That's how trust is rebuilt, one whisper at a time. Betrayal taught you what deception sounds like. Now grace will teach you what truth feels like. The enemy may have used lies to confuse you, but God will use truth to reawaken you. So if you're standing in that uncertain place now, afraid to trust your own heart, don't rush. Sit with God until your soul starts to recognize His voice again. It will happen slowly, gently, but it will happen. The same God who spoke before the pain is still speaking after it. You just need to remember His tone. It's the sound of love that never manipulates, peace that never pressures, and presence that never leaves. That's the voice that led you once, and it's the same one leading you home again. When forgiveness becomes the door to freedom, forgiveness is one of the hardest choices a wounded heart can make. It feels unfair, even impossible. You replay what was said, what was done, what was taken from you, and everything in you resists letting go. You want justice, not mercy. You want an apology, not silence. Yet somewhere deep inside, you also want peace. And that's where the battle begins. The struggle between holding on to the hurt and releasing it to God. Forgiveness doesn't start with feelings. It begins with a decision, one that may feel like weakness at first but ends in unimaginable strength. Because forgiveness is not saying what happened was right. It's saying that what happened will no longer have the power to define your life. Many people think forgiveness is about the other person, but in truth, it's about you. It's about breaking the chain that keeps you tied to the past. When you refuse to forgive, you carry your offender everywhere you go. Their shadow walks with you into new relationships, new opportunities, new prayers. You think you're protecting yourself, but you're actually imprisoning yourself. The person who hurt you may have moved on, but you're still reliving the same wound every day. God never designed your soul to live that way. He wants to free you, not through vengeance, but through release, because holding on to pain doesn't punish them. It poisons you. Forgiveness is not denial. It doesn't mean pretending you weren't hurt or pretending everything is fine. It's acknowledging the pain without allowing it to become your identity. When Jesus forgave those who crucified Him, He didn't ignore the nails. He redeemed them. He showed that love is stronger than betrayal, and mercy has more power than revenge. When you forgive, you don't erase the wound. You transform it. It stops being a mark of what was done to you and becomes a testimony of what God did within you. The truth is, forgiveness doesn't happen once. It happens repeatedly. Some days the pain resurfaces and you'll have to choose forgiveness all over again. That's normal. Healing is a process, not an event. Each time you choose to release rather than resent, the hold of bitterness weakens. Slowly, the emotions that once ruled you begin to lose their power. Forgiveness is like unlocking a prison door, only to realize the one being set free is you. One of the most beautiful things about forgiveness is how it restores clarity. Pain distorts perception. It makes you see life through the lens of fear and anger. But when you forgive, your heart begins to see again, not the past but the possibility of the future. You start to feel lighter, freer, cleaner. You realize that the anger that used to drain you no longer controls your thoughts. That's when you understand that forgiveness was never about condoning what they did. It was about reclaiming who you are. But how do you forgive when the wound is still open? The answer is found not in your strength, but in God's. You don't forgive because you feel ready. You forgive because He forgave you first. His Spirit empowers you to do what your flesh cannot. The same grace that lifted you out of your failures will help you release the failures of others. Forgiveness is not a human act. It's a divine collaboration. You bring the pain, God brings the peace. You surrender the memory. He rewrites the meaning. There will be moments when forgiving feels like letting the guilty go free. But remember, forgiveness doesn't cancel justice, it hands it back to God. It's trusting that He will deal with the situation better than you ever could. You can let go not because they deserve it, but because your soul deserves rest. The moment you forgive, you stop reliving what happened and start releasing what's possible. That's when you step into freedom, the kind that no apology or revenge could ever give you. And here's the truth that changes everything. Forgiveness doesn't make you weak. It makes you unstoppable, because nothing can control a heart that has chosen mercy. The enemy loses his grip when you forgive, because bitterness is his favorite chain. But when you forgive, you break it. You take back your authority, your peace, your joy. You stop being the victim of your past and start becoming the vessel of God's grace. So if you're holding on to pain today, let it be the last time. Speak the words your heart has resisted. I release them. Say it not because they were right, but because you refuse to stay bound by what they did. Forgive them, and let God handle the rest. He will turn your forgiveness into healing, and your healing into testimony. And when that freedom finally settles in, you'll see what He was doing all along, using forgiveness as the door that led you out of the darkness and into the light of peace. The peace that doesn't depend on who stayed or left. There comes a moment in every healing journey when you realize that peace isn't about people, it's about presence. For so long, your sense of calm depended on who was around you, who supported you, who stayed to listen when life fell apart. You measured stability by connection and safety by loyalty. But then people changed, promises broke, and those you thought would never leave walked away without looking back. It's in that heartbreak that you learn one of life's hardest, holiest lessons. Peace that depends on people will always be fragile, but peace that comes from God is unshakable. This is where divine peace begins, not in perfect circumstances, but in surrender. You stop chasing explanations and start embracing acceptance. You stop asking, "Why did they leave?" and begin whispering, "Thank you, God, for staying." Because the truth is, people will leave for reasons you may never understand. Some departures are betrayals, others are blessings in disguise. But in every loss, one truth remains. God never walks away. His presence is not seasonal, it's eternal. The peace He gives isn't tied to who stands beside you. It's rooted in who lives within you. At first, this kind of peace feels foreign. You expect comfort to come from reconciliation, from closure, from words that might never be spoken. You wait for apologies that may never arrive. But as the silence stretches, something sacred begins to happen. You stop waiting for peace to come from the outside, and you start discovering it inside. You realize that your calm was never meant to depend on who values you, but on how deeply you rest in the one who never stops loving you. God's peace doesn't erase pain, it transforms it. It doesn't remove what hurt you, it redeems it. He teaches you that real peace is not the absence of storms, but the presence of trust in the middle of them. When Jesus calmed the sea, he didn't remove his disciples from the storm. He revealed his authority over it. The same is true for you. The storm of betrayal, loss, and loneliness may still surround you, but inside, something shifts. You begin to breathe again, not because the storm ended, but because you finally understood who is in your boat. Peace also comes when you stop begging people to understand what God only intended to reveal through time. Some will misjudge your silence. Some will walk away before the full story unfolds. That's okay. You don't need everyone to see your heart for God to vindicate it. The same hands that allowed separation will also write restoration. The same God who closed one chapter will open another in his timing. You don't have to chase what left. You only have to stay where grace is. This peace is not passive. It's powerful. It's the kind that keeps you standing when everything else falls apart. It's the calm that confuses those who expected you to crumble. It's the quiet strength that makes you smile again, not because life is perfect, but because your soul finally is. That's when you know you've healed. Not when everyone comes back, but when you no longer need them to. You'll start seeing people differently. You'll love freely, but you won't cling. You'll forgive, but you won't forget who your peace belongs to. When you reach this level of peace, even loneliness changes its meaning. It stops being emptiness and becomes intimacy. What once felt like isolation becomes the place where you encounter God most deeply. His voice replaces their silence. His love fills the space they left behind. And one morning, you wake up and realize that what you feared losing was never the source of your peace. It was just the noise covering it. You will know you found divine peace when your heart stays still, even when life shakes again. When someone leaves and you no longer panic, when plans fall through and you no longer despair, when the same pain that once broke you now drives you into prayer, that's peace. That's maturity. That's God finishing what pain started. Peace that depends on people will rise and fall with their choices, but peace that depends on God will remain steady through them all. So stop waiting for everyone to come back. Stop waiting for life to feel familiar again. God isn't rebuilding what was lost. He's building something better. Peace that cannot be stolen, broken, or abandoned. The kind of peace that stays when everyone else leaves. Because at the end of every heartbreak, every goodbye, and every lonely night, one truth stands unshaken. God's presence is the only constant you will ever need. When you finally rest in that truth, you'll see that peace was never gone. It was simply waiting for you to stop depending on who stayed and start depending on who never left. The new trust, learning to believe without proof. There comes a point in every believer's journey where faith must evolve. It's no longer about what you can see, measure, or feel. It becomes about what you know in the depths of your spirit. After betrayal, after loss, after all the prayers that seemed unanswered, trust must be rebuilt from the ground up. But this time, it's different. It's not the kind of trust that depends on outcomes. It's the kind that clings to God's character even when nothing makes sense. It's the kind of trust that doesn't demand proof, because you've already seen enough of His goodness to believe without it. When life breaks your expectations, you face a choice. Either you let doubt take root, or you let faith grow deeper. You can keep asking for signs, or you can start walking by conviction. God is not offended by your questions, but He doesn't want you to live imprisoned by them. He wants you to grow from needing reassurance to resting in relationship. Belief without proof is not blindness, it's maturity. It's saying, God, even if I can't trace you, I will trust you. It's the spiritual leap that turns wounded believers into warriors of faith. This new trust is not fragile. It's forged through disappointment, refined by waiting, and strengthened by silence. It's what happens when you've run out of reasons to believe and yet still whisper, I know you're faithful. You no longer need a miracle to prove that God is good. You've seen His mercy in the way He carried you through the nights you thought you wouldn't survive. You don't need an explanation for every loss. You've learned that sometimes protection looks like unanswered prayer. This is the sacred paradox of mature faith. You stop needing control, and you start finding peace in surrender. Believing without proof is not pretending that pain doesn't exist. It's choosing to see beyond it. It's the moment you stop asking, "Why did this happen to me?" and start saying, "What is this teaching me about you, God?" Trust at this level isn't about ignoring reality. It's about letting eternity define it. When you reach this place, your prayers change. They stop sounding like panic and start sounding like partnership. You stop demanding outcomes and start aligning with purpose. You begin to understand that faith is not about getting what you want. It's about becoming who God designed you to be. The new trust doesn't wait for the storm to end before it believes in peace. It declares, "Even here, even now, even in this pain, I know you are good." That's the kind of trust that silences fear, that confuses the enemy, that opens doors no human hand could close. When you believe without proof, heaven moves differently, because God trusts those who trust Him even when they don't see results. That's the level of faith that parts seas, that walks on water, that turns prisons into pulpits. This kind of faith also changes how you respond to waiting. When the answer takes longer than you hoped, you no longer interpret delay as denial. You understand that God is never late, He's precise. You stop counting time and start counting testimonies. You begin to see the hidden beauty in the seasons that make no sense. The unanswered prayers that once frustrated you now humble you. You realize that faith isn't proven when God gives what you asked for. It's proven when you still praise Him even when He doesn't. To believe without proof is to return to childlike trust, but with the wisdom of experience. It's not naive optimism, it's grounded conviction. It's the kind of trust that says, "I've seen too much of His faithfulness to doubt Him now." Every time you choose to believe in silence, you're building a spiritual foundation that cannot be shaken by sight. The world calls it foolishness, but heaven calls it maturity. Because when you stop needing signs, you become one. And perhaps this is what God has been teaching you all along. Not how to control the outcome, but how to rest in His sovereignty. When you no longer need evidence to believe, you finally understand that faith was never about certainty. It was about relationship. Proof satisfies the mind, but trust heals the heart. And when your heart is healed, faith flows naturally again, not forced, not fearful, but free. So if you're standing in the middle of questions right now, without answers, without clarity, just remember this. Your faith is not weak because you can't see. It's stronger because you still believe. You're not lost. You're learning to walk by faith, not by sight. And as you do, something powerful begins to happen. The same God you once begged to prove Himself begins to prove Himself through you. Your peace becomes your testimony. Your endurance becomes your evidence. And your trust, reborn through pain, becomes the light that leads others out of their own darkness. From betrayal to breakthrough, the divine ending that changes everything. Every story written by God begins with a breaking and ends with a blessing. What once felt like destruction reveals itself as divine reconstruction. The betrayal that shattered you, the silence that tested you, the loss that hollowed you, they were never the conclusion. They were the chapters that shaped the strength for what comes next. What looked like the end of your peace was only the beginning of your purpose. Because God never leaves His children in ashes, He always writes resurrection into their story. The pain you endured wasn't random. It was an appointment. Every sleepless night, every unanswered prayer, every tear that burned your face, God collected them. Nothing was wasted. While you thought you were falling apart, heaven was aligning every broken piece for your breakthrough. The people who betrayed you didn't stop your destiny. They helped fulfill it. Their rejection redirected you to where you truly belong. God doesn't lose control of your story when others walk away. He refocuses it around His will. The divine ending of your story is not the return of what was lost, but the revelation of what was hidden. You'll look back and realize that what was taken from you never truly belonged to your future. God allowed the breaking so He could remove what couldn't hold the weight of your calling. You prayed for peace and He gave you separation. You prayed for strength and He gave you storms. You prayed for faith and He gave you silence. And through every unanswered question, He was building the kind of person who could stand in the place He always prepared. The breakthrough. God is leading you toward is not just external, it's internal. It's not about a door opening in front of you. It's about the door opening within you. It's the moment you realize you no longer need closure to be free, no longer need validation to feel seen, no longer need understanding to have peace. That's what divine healing looks like. The same pain that once made you cry now makes you wise. The same silence that once frightened you now feels holy. The same betrayal that once defined you now becomes your testimony. When God finishes what He started, He doesn't erase the scars. He redeems them. Your scars become the proof of survival, the evidence of grace. They tell a story not of weakness, but of victory. They remind you that you walked through the fire and came out refined, not destroyed. And as you begin to share that story, others will find hope in your healing. You'll become the very miracle you once prayed for, because every breakthrough carries a responsibility to comfort others with the comfort you received. The divine ending also reveals something greater than restoration. It reveals revelation. You begin to see God differently. You stop seeing Him as the one who let you suffer and start seeing Him as the one who never left you in it. His silence becomes sacred. His timing becomes perfect. His plan becomes clear. The confusion that once clouded your faith now deepens your gratitude. You understand why He didn't answer sooner, why He didn't remove the pain earlier, why He let certain people leave. Because if He had intervened before the breaking, you would have missed the blessing hidden inside it. This is the mystery of grace. What once wounded you becomes the very place where God's glory shines the brightest. You become more compassionate, more patient, more discerning, more grounded in truth. Pain teaches what comfort never could. You stop needing to be understood and start longing to understand others. You stop craving revenge and start celebrating redemption. And that's when you realize this is the breakthrough you were waiting for all along. Your breakthrough isn't a sudden miracle. It's a gradual awakening. It's when you notice that the anger is gone, that the heaviness has lifted, that your heart feels whole again. It's when you wake up one morning and realize you've stopped rehearsing the pain and started living the promise. You're no longer the same person who once begged for the situation to change. You've changed. And that change is the real miracle. So as you stand here at the end of this journey, take a deep breath. The storm has done its work. The silence has served its purpose. The betrayal has lost its power. You've become the evidence that God can take the worst moments of a life and use them to create something holy. What was meant to destroy you became the seed of your destiny. And now, as heaven watches, God speaks one final word into your spirit: it is finished. Not as an ending, but as a beginning. Because this is how divine stories always close. Not with despair, but with destiny. Not with loss, but with life. You have walked through betrayal and arrived in breakthrough. You have moved from silence to song, from pain to purpose, from confusion to clarity. And now, peace, the kind that doesn't depend on who stayed or left, has finally found a home inside you. The story isn't over, it's just beginning. You're standing in the divine ending that changes everything.